Good morning everyone. It's a real pleasure to be able to speak to you today, particularly for two main reasons. The first one is that I've been really excited by the volunteering research that we've been undertaking at the National Trust, and I'm always really pleased to share it with people. But the second reason is it's really nice to present on home turf and to see so many friends and colleagues and familiar faces in the audience. So hopefully that'll be a good thing. I think it's slightly scarier when you're talking to a load of people that we know very well, but we'll see how we go. I wanted to start kind of in the past, really. Next year will be the anniversary of the social reformer Octavia Hill. She was a remarkable and inspiring woman who was the driving force behind social housing. But she was also an advocate of the availability of green open spaces to the poor, and she campaigned for beauty in everyday life. She didn't really believe much in classic charity and handouts, but she had a strong belief in the role of self-help, self-improvement and mutual cooperation. And these are a movement, if you like, that has many roots in Swindon's past. Along with Hunter and Rawnsley, they're a bit of a radical bunch. They shared a deep sadness and concern for the impact that rampant industrialisation was having on the environment and then the quality of people's lives, a theme which is kind of quite familiar again today. But the first practical step was a letter from Octavia in 1884 to Robert Hunter, who was a solicitor. She wanted to know if there was any legal way a garden in Deptford in London could be permanently preserved. Hunter replied that the legislation simply didn't exist. It set Hunter thinking about how a charitable body might be set up with the purpose of preserving something in perpetuity for the nation, and he came up with the idea of the National Trust. It took him about 10 years to take that idea into reality. So by 1895, he had set up this organisation, and it took until 1907 for the National Trust Act to be passed in Parliament. And its mission was fairly simple and wide. It was to promote the permanent preservation of the built environment and buildings of historic and natural beauty for the benefit of the nation, for the benefit of everybody. So Rawnsley, Octavia Hill and Robert Hunter were volunteers of their time, and others like them flourished during that period. Today the Trust has grown beyond their wildest dreams. It really is quite amazing. We now own over 300 houses, gardens and parks, 700 miles of coastline, 650,000 acres of land, nature reserves, pubs, villages, industrial sites, you name it, we've probably got one somewhere. So in terms of the volunteering picture for the National Trust, last year we involved 62,000 volunteers who contributed 3.6 million hours, and we reckon that's the equivalent to at least £13 million. We invest about £5 to £6 million every year into volunteering-related activity, whether that be central management, marketing, promotion, volunteer managers, all of that kind of infrastructure that goes with it. To put this into context, 62,000 volunteers, we only have 5,000 paid staff. So it's quite clear that the Trust couldn't operate without our volunteer workforce. And in particular, you're likely to see the core of our volunteers on the front line. So you're statistically way more likely to bump into a volunteer at one of our properties than you are a paid member of staff. And they play a key role in delivering our visitor experience. So how does that break down? Well, we have about 6,000 people involved in programmes, such as our really popular Working Holidays programme, employee volunteering, things like that. And then a huge chunk in groups. These might be national partnerships and relationships with bodies like Prince's Trust or BTCV, or they might be localised partnerships with schools and colleges and others. And then finally, the bulk are those classic, stereotypical volunteers of the National Trust that come to mind, which help us on an ongoing and very regular basis. And also those people, increasingly actually for us, that are getting involved in full-time volunteering opportunities and internships. So, over the last 18 months or so, we've been leading a national research project into the whole volunteering market, We're trying to understand how the volunteering market works, who's in it, what are the barriers that people face, what are the perceptions that people have about volunteering and volunteer-involving organisations. And in a recent poll that we ran, we asked for loads of questions, but one of them was what charities in general would you say you support? And what's really clear here is the dominance of kids, health-related causes, and of course animals. It's always animals. It came up consistently in all the work we did, people talking about nice fluffy animals. I guess the message there is for organisations that want to involve volunteers or expand their volunteering, it's all about trying to understand where you fit in what is frankly quite a busy marketplace and increasingly is becoming very competitive. So you have to understand what's your kind of subsector of organisations that you're competing against to get people's time. So in terms of the external volunteering climate, first of all, despite unprecedented levels of investment in volunteering over the last 10 years, volunteering levels have remained static at the national level. Anywhere, depending on how you measure it, anywhere between 20 and 30% of the population volunteer. So a typical profile of a volunteer on average is a middle-aged woman from the highest social grade who already gives to charity and is a regular worshipper. But we have seen some changes. The typical volunteer is less likely to be female, and there is a growth amongst men volunteering. And also, perhaps an explanation of some good that might have come out of all that investment is that there has been an increase in younger people volunteering, and they're starting to catch up with their older counterparts in terms of levels of volunteering activity. But the big problem is, no matter if the gender changes or the age changes, the one big problem is social class. It's still dominated by a particular section of society that volunteer, and it's a really stubborn issue, which is actually getting worse. So, the objectives that we set out for our project were kind of simple in a way, new, more and better. So we wanted to find out how we could recruit more volunteers, how we could recruit different types of volunteers, and most importantly of all, how we could give them a good experience, and how essentially we could manage those volunteers in a really good way, suited to their interest and passion and skills. So we wanted to understand who volunteered in the UK at the moment. We wanted to understand what motivated them to volunteer. We wanted to know what barriers they face, what their overall lives look like. We took all that information, chucked it all together, analysed it, and we came up with a series of audiences, which I'll come on to in a moment. But the big thing was motivation. Understanding people's motivations to volunteering is absolutely crucial to understand how to create a really good volunteer opportunity. Now, what you see here is fairly obvious. Basically, there's a desire to help make a difference. It's the most common motivation for volunteering. The second most common is slightly more self-satisfying, that sense that it would make me feel better about myself. But also funded to the importance of the local community, and that's really good for many of you here today, compared to a national organisation like the Trust, where people talked really strongly about how important it was that a cause or an organisation was locally relevant and based in that community. To differing amounts, I'll come on to that in a minute. So that's great for a lot of you, more challenging for big national organisations like the Trust. Skills, exercise, fun, intellectual development and qualifications were generally low priorities for the majority of the market. Instead, the majority volunteered to satisfy their soul, address a sense of altruistic guilt, and also to broaden their horizons. So that looks fairly sensible and makes sense. But the problem is that everybody's different. And when you break out motivations by audience group, which I'll come on to those groups in a moment, you can see that there's a real difference in people's motivations. And therefore, we have to understand these differences in motivation to be able to understand how we can promote, recruit, retain, and most importantly, manage volunteers. So, I wanted to come up with a really, really simple way of trying to understand, on one hand, top to bottom, the propensity, if you like, for people to volunteer from not a chance, thank you, all the way through to I'd absolutely love to. And then the other way, their motivations. Is it kind of, in a way, quite selfish motivations for wanting to volunteer, or is it very altruistic and community focused? So we took this axes, if you like, and we plotted on them the audiences that we found. Now, I haven't got time today to go into all of these audiences, but instead I've decided to pick on 3 core areas. The first one are what we'll call the 18 to 30s. The second one is what we've called the big society champions. And then finally, families. So we've got 2 groups that fall into the 18 to 30s, 2 groups into the big society champions, and then 2 family groups. So to kick things off, our active citizens. These guys are essentially the backbone of the big society. They're altruistic and community focused. What was surprising to us when we met with these people is we were expecting to find our classic core volunteers in this group, and they weren't there, and that was really surprising to us. And what's happening with this predominantly reaching retirement, already retired age group, is that retirement is changing, and it has been for a little while, and it will continue to change for a mixture of economic reasons, but also more social reasons, like the increasing caring role that these people have for their grandchildren. And that's changing both the physical availability of these people to volunteer, but also their motivations for doing so. On the other hand, this group are absolutely ginormous. These are the baby boomers which are leaving the job market en masse over these next few years and already. So there is a massive, massive potential there. But they already lead pretty busy lives. They're very active. As I said, they're caring for grandchildren possibly. And they're already involved in lots of clubs and groups, whether that's for volunteering or for leisure or both. They tend to have a lot of educational qualifications, and they want to feel useful, they want to utilise those skills and gain a sense of intellectual stimulation. But they do show real concerns that it's always the same people that do all the work, and that you have to be really strong to say no. Many of them said things to us like, you get sucked in and you just can't get out, or I was crash scanned. So there are some challenges with that audience, and one of the things they said about the stereotype of volunteers is although they were relatively close in age to those people, they saw them as really old, and some of the comments that we got in focus groups were really quite alarming and negative about the current perception of the classic volunteer. One person in a group described, we asked them to describe the classic National Trust volunteer, and one of them said, I can't believe it, some little old lady called Doris. I mean, she could hardly walk. And this is really, really quite negative comments about our current volunteers. Now, they're perceptions that aren't necessarily true, but if we can't break down those perceptions, we're in real trouble in terms of recruiting these people that technically are relatively close in age, but they're a world apart in terms of generation. So, moving on to, if you like, active citizens' slightly weaker cousins, these guys are what we call quite modest altruists in comparison to active citizens. They're keen to give something back to society and to help others in need. They're at a point in their lives where they want to pass their knowledge on to others, but they're keen to have fun whilst they do so. They do want to be moved out of their comfort zone and try new things and continually learn. So for this group of people, short-term start opportunities, which will leave them with a sense of community and belonging, will be a really good start and will act as a hook. But we have to be really careful not to scare these guys off with a sense of massive commitment at the very start. They need to be eased into it, and then they'll probably convert in quite a big number to regular, ongoing volunteering. But we have to be careful not to scare them off. So, on to the families. Now, Explore Families were really interesting to talk to. David Cameron would be really, really pleased with this group because they were absolutely spot on, bang on message when it came to the big society. Whilst as parents, they live incredibly busy working lives, and they don't have a massive amount of time to volunteer or what they see as volunteering. They are very, very keen to involve their kids in volunteering as a way of promoting good citizenship, good habits, and a sense of community, and things which will help their school learning. So they're very keen to volunteer together as a family group. Whilst they don't recognise these parents that they volunteer currently, they are the sorts of parents that you typically find on PTAs and governors and that kind of thing. So they're not primarily altruistic, they're about passing on good experiences and a sense of community to their kids. So activities need to be fun, but carry a strong message. So a very potential important target for increasing families in volunteering. In complete contrast to what we call kids first families, they put the needs and the wants of their children first, and this reflects their attitudes to volunteering. Frankly, these people are going to struggle to volunteer if they think the kids won't like it or if they're going to spend the whole time moaning, as many of them say. So they're the complete opposite of the explorer families. Volunteering is not often for personal benefit, so there needs to be tangible benefits from getting involved. But on the other hand, and again, relevant for very local and neighbourhood working, these guys do have quite a strong sense of community, and they have this sense of that charity begins at home. So again, for a big national organisation, not a big strategic target, but certainly at neighbourhood level volunteering, there is potential with this crowd that has to be solved with some very tangible benefits, and it needs to make sure it's relevant for the whole family. So on into the 18 to 30s group, young developers, it's pretty clear. These guys want the hard benefits. They're looking for skills development, they're looking for experience, and they're looking for things that they can put on their CV. They're not volunteering in huge numbers at the moment, but they have a very high interest in doing so. They want flexible volunteering opportunities to fit around their busy lives, whether that's because of work or study. But they currently feel put off because they're not sure that they have the skills or experience or confidence to get involved, or that they'll feel welcomed by other volunteers that are already involved. Now, given the current job market, this area is growing, and I think there's both potential and real kind of societal need to work with these guys, and that can be shown on one end of the spectrum through the expansion of internships, which certainly National Trust has done so over the last year, but also at the other end of the spectrum for those young people which have been somewhat let down by whether it's the education system or other factors, and so there's potential for that end of the spectrum as well. And then again, like I said before, the slightly weaker cousins of young developers are what we call young experience seekers. Now, they split absolutely 50% apart. The first half are essentially the young developers, so they want hard benefits, they want stuff which is for their CV, they want skills development. But the other half are really fascinating. These are people who already volunteer or are keen to do so, but they no longer need to make those amendments to their CV because they've already got into their career or job. So they're starting to become more passionate, more altruistic, and they do have a belief in helping causes, and they feel a responsibility to kind of do their bit. But the problem is, both halves of this audience have common perceptions which act as a major barrier to them getting involved. The first one is, which was specific to the National Trust, but also to other organisations like us, is that they saw our brand as elitist and old, so they very much need to see testimonials from people like them that would help show them that the organisation is relevant to them, it's fun, it's engaging, and offers good experiences, and they can meet other people like them. That social element is very important to this group in volunteering. It's not just about the volunteering, it's about making friends. We've got some really interesting stuff. We talked to people in Bristol, London and Manchester with this group. And one of the things which came out really strongly was the sense that these people quite often are living in urban areas where they didn't grow up, they haven't got family around them, they haven't got that many friends around them. And actually getting involved in volunteering is a really good way to meet people and to make friends, or maybe even get a date. Quite a few times. So there is real potential of understanding this group, particularly in cities. They were keen on trial days and taster activities, and there is a real need to keep recruitment very simple and clear. They spend their lives doing job applications, and they didn't want volunteering to feel like a formal process either. So, as Matt mentioned, I did a bit of a big brother moment on you. Quite a number of you filled in a very short survey. It wasn't just a survey. It enabled me to profile you against these audiences. Good sign, I guess, and kind of makes sense. About half of you are active citizens. So about half of you in here are the backbones of a big society in Swindon, so that's surely a very good sign. Put that into context. context, only about 15% of the UK population do fall into that group, so we're definitely over-indexed on that today. And then the young developers and the experience seekers, that's fairly normal, slightly below average in the audience today. But what we're also finding is, while predominantly these audiences do have an age associated to them, that's not always the case. For example, when I fill in the survey, I end up being an active citizen and I'm not reaching retirement, unfortunately. You will find that some people pop up in young developers that aren't actually young. They just have, maybe they're returning to the workplace after having children or something like that, and they're wanting to volunteer to rebuild their skills. So Explorer families generally in the population will have about 23% of the potential volunteering market. Now that's really quite considerable actually, so they are a key group to concentrate on. What I will say is it's a good job that the survey was anonymous, because when we did this piece of research, there were some other segments that were frankly way below not keen. And there's 1% of you that fell into what our agency we employed quite terribly called routine relaxers, which sounds more like a laxative, to be honest. But they really do not want to volunteer. So which puts it on the risk, because one of you or two of you fall into that category. So, key messages then. Understanding and motivation is absolutely crucial to understanding why people volunteer and therefore how to get them volunteering. Linked to that is getting the communication right. A one-size-fits-all approach to volunteering, in my view and the researchers' view, is not the way to go. You need the right message targeted at the right people in the right way. There's a general sense across all audiences that their awareness of volunteering opportunities is really low, and they just don't know how to get involved in opportunities, they don't know how to find out about opportunities, they don't know if it's for them, or if they have the skills or confidence to do so, and even some people are worried about the money side of it. You know, will I get my expenses? Really basic, fundamental things to those of us in the sector that we provide, but actually to large parts of the population, in itself is a very simple barrier. So the bottom line is this. We created a segmentation model of the UK, which technically showed that the potential market size for volunteering is about 67% of the population. Now that's huge, given the fact that at the moment only 20 to 30% do. Now what that says to us is, okay, there's about 30% potential in terms of new people if you get them with the right proposition, the right volunteering product. So there is potential there to grow with people which, on the surface of it, are interested. They just need some help getting there. So I guess the basic message is, don't worry, certainly as a short-term measure, about that 30% of the population which just do not care, because there's still massive room to grow within some core audiences. So to sum things up finally, at the start I talked about the origins of the National Trust in the 19th century. But the Trust wasn't alone in setting up a body with such a social purpose and a strong sense of volunteering at its core. There are so many examples, many of them in Swindon and other towns with strong industry at the time, to go into now. Of course, by the 20th century, things took a very different course, in many respects via the state. Later, we began to see this kind of cult of the individual that has dominated politics and culture, certainly up until the recent banking crisis. But it does seem to me that people, at least some people, are re-evaluating the need to connect with the fundamental sense of community, and that to solve our problems we need to come together without being told what to do by government or quangos, which has for far too long stifled active citizenship and local control. There are new forms of social action emerging, as well as old ones which are waiting to be refound. So I'm looking forward to celebrating Octavia Hill's anniversary next year. But it got me thinking, what social pioneers of today will we be celebrating in 50 or 100 years' time in Swindon? Perhaps one Swindon will help give way and enable these volunteers, many of them that are in the room today, with their diverse skills and, most importantly, their diverse motivations, to bring about change like so many of our Victorian